Jacob was on his way home. 20 years had passed since Jacob had fled, fearing the wrath of his twin brother Esau, whom he had cheated out of his birthright and his blessing by Isaac, their father. He had fled with Esau, vowing to kill him, fearing for his life. And now, with 2 wives, his children, his slaves, and herds and flocks, he was coming home. God had spoken to Jacob, saying, "Return to the land of your ancestors and to your kindred, and I will be with you." With this command and this promise, Jacob sets out. But Jacob had not forgotten how he had left home, and he was sure that Esau hadn't forgotten either. When he heard from scouts sent ahead that Esau was coming towards him with 400 men, Jacob was afraid, fearing for his life and the life of his family. And Jacob prays to God, "O God of my father Abraham and God of my father Isaac, O Lord, who said to me, 'Return to your country and to your kindred, and I will do you good.' I am not worthy of the least of all the steadfast love and all the faithfulness that you have shown to your servant. For with only my staff I crossed this Jordan, and now I've become 2 companies. Deliver me, please, from the hand of my brother, from the hand of Esau, for I am afraid of him. He may come and kill us all, the mothers with the children. Yet you have said, 'I will surely do you good and make your offspring as the sand of the sea, which cannot be counted because of their number.'" Jacob then went to extraordinary ends, attempting to secure his own safety and the safety of his wives and his children. First, he takes and he separates his clan into 2 separate groups, with his own wife and children and himself making up the second group, farthest back from the approaching Esau. And then Jacob reasons that Esau might be bought off with gifts, so he sends out large numbers of goats and sheep and camels and cows and donkeys, all in front of him, and all with spaces between each group of animals, further increasing the space between Jacob and his brother. Jacob does all he can to separate himself, to distance himself from the impending doom and wrath of a wronged brother. In fact, Jacob puts everything he has in front of him, and he is left alone at night, vulnerable. And it is there, in his aloneness and in his vulnerableness, that Jacob encounters God. Jacob does everything he can to protect himself, but he cannot protect himself from God. Jacob seems to have forgotten the promise God had made, "I will be with you," and then goes to such elaborate means of self-preservation. But there, on the banks of the river, Jacob encounters God. Jacob wrestles with God. They wrestle all night. Jacob holds his own, and as the new day breaks, the fight stops, and Jacob is changed. He has a new name, no longer Jacob, meaning one who grasps or connives, but now he is called Israel, one who wrestles with God. He is blessed. God's promises to him are made fresh and new. And he is limping. His hip joint permanently out of joint, limping for the rest of his life. Israel's encounter with God has brought safety and blessing, but it has left him handicapped, disabled, weakened. Wait, I thought that when one encounters God, it is a God who gathers us under his wings, protecting us from all harm and injury, not a God who leaves us hurting, limping for the rest of our lives like Jacob. You know, in other places in the Bible, we read that God will not let us stumble or trip as we walk the path of our lives, as we follow God. But here, in this story, yes, Jacob is blessed, but yes, Jacob is hurt. We don't like to be hurt, do we? We go to great lengths to distance ourselves from things that bring pain and danger. Maybe just as Jacob tried to insulate himself from Esau, we insulate ourselves from those things that are threatening. We would rather risk not being hurt in our relationships, so we are not honest with each other, and we put up defenses so that those we meet will not know just how vulnerable we actually are. Maybe we can't bear the realities in our lives, so we protect ourselves with drugs or alcohol or other addictions. Maybe the thought of our own weakness and the scariness of confronting who we really are causes us to be busy, filling up the emptiness of who we are with action and movement. But we can't escape God. God knows who we are. God knows what we are. God knows our weaknesses, our defenses, and God encounters us when we are weak and alone and vulnerable. It's interesting that in both this story from Genesis and in our gospel text, the two main characters, Jacob, of course, in Genesis, and then the widow in the parable that Jesus tells, are both vulnerable, but are lifted up as examples of faith and courage. Jacob, whose hip is permanently displaced, does not let go until he receives a blessing and he is given a new name, Israel. And the widow? Well, she keeps coming and coming back, crying out, "Give me justice," which she receives because of her persistence. And both receive help. Both, in their weakness and vulnerability, are heard and given what they desire. For you see, my friends, we encounter God in God's weakness, aloneness, in God's vulnerableness. Recently, I came across this painting by the Florentine artist Botticelli. It is entitled "The Resurrected Christ." It is a representation of Jesus risen from the dead, victorious over death, alive. And yet, Jesus is carrying signs and reminders of what happened. Do you see the marks of the nails in his hands? Notice the baggy and bloodshot eyes and the sorrowful face. The crown of thorns still affixed on his head, blood stains from the blood that trickled down, still visible on his face. Someone who looks as though they have experienced suffering and pain. Now, Botticelli makes a theological statement with this painting, but one that rings true. God loves us. God suffered for us. God has blessed all time and space through God's Son, Jesus Christ. God has defeated death and sin and pain and suffering, and yet Christ bears the marks of death and pain, even in the life without end. We encounter God, and we know how vulnerable and weak we are. And we carry with us hurts and pains. Maybe we would not rather suffer at all, but we do suffer and hurt. And yet, in our weakness, we are not left alone. We are not deserted, left to the hands of all that threatens us. For you see, God still blesses us. God gives us life. God listens when we cry out for justice. God is not alien to our hurts and pains and losses. God knows it all. Have faith.